hope that we can work out a bipartisan, reasonable way to keep interest rates on student loans at a lower level. We owe it to these families and to these students. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Madam President, let me first thank the distinguished senator from Illinois for his determined efforts, and my senior colleague in this body, Senator Jack Reed, for his determined efforts to try to get to a resolution that will prevent the student loan interest rates from doubling. I'm here today to speak about another problem in which something very important to ordinary Americans is also being jammed up as a result of obstruction and intransigence. And in my case, it is the highway bill. We had a March 31st deadline, the House and the Senate, to get a highway bill done. The Senate did its job. We got a highway bill done by March 31st. The House did not do its job. They failed to get a highway bill done. Let me point out that we've been doing highway bills in Congress back since the Eisenhower administration, and this is not rocket science. So it is telling that the body at the other end of this building could not get a highway and bridge bill done by the March 31st deadline. So what did they do? They extended it and took us to conference on the Senate bill. Now, let's say a word about the Senate bill. The Senate bill is very hard to criticize. People sometimes criticize bills around here because they get jammed through, there isn't enough time, there aren't enough amendments, it's not bipartisan. None of those criticisms apply to the Senate bill. The Senate highway bill came out of my Environment and Public Works Committee, thanks to the leadership of Chairman Boxer and Ranking Member Inhofe, with the unanimous support of every Republican and every Democrat. It came to the floor. We had a wide open process here on the floor. I think nearly 40 amendments were accepted, either in floor votes or by agreement. Everybody had their chance, everybody had their day, and the net result of all of this was that the bill cleared out of the Senate with 75 senators on record supporting it. That's a pretty impressive majority around here. So we have a 75-22 Senate bill. It has the support of the Chamber of Commerce and the Association of Manufacturers and the pavers. It's got the support of the labor unions and the environmental community. There's really nothing to criticize about it, either substantively or in terms of the process by which it was adopted. And yet, our colleagues on the House side won't accept the bipartisan Senate bill. They have got it bottled up in this conference. And the reason that I'm on the floor today is that we're being told now that the House is going to ask for another extension past the end of June to continue to dawdle and stall the bipartisan highway bill. Now, what's the effect of that? What is the effect of dawdling and stalling the bipartisan Senate highway bill? The effect is loss of jobs. The presiding officer is from New York. I'm from Rhode Island. The distinguished senator from Utah is here on the floor. All of us have a common situation in our states, which is winter. In winter, it is really hard to build and repair highways and bridges. There is a summer construction season. And as we dawdle and as we delay and as the House jams up the bipartisan Senate highways bill, that summer season gets whittled away. We are now at the point where my Director of Transportation in Rhode Island, Mike Lewis, says that he had 97 jobs on his roster to be done in this summer construction season, and if we can't get this done earlier than when we anticipate doing it now, at the end of this month, at the end of June, 40 of those projects drop off the roster. 40 projects. And all of the jobs associated with them are lost. Rhode Island is a small state. Those numbers are going to echo eastward and northward across the country in job loss this summer because of delay by the House of a bipartisan Senate highways bill. This is real jobs. It is not just me making this observation, and it's not just the Rhode Island Director of Transportation. The Standard & Poor's Global Credit Portal Ratings Direct Service has put out a publication, Increasingly Unpredictable Federal Funding Could Stall U.S. Transportation Infrastructure Projects. They say the following: with the March 31st expiration looming, Congress passed on March 29th yet another extension to fund U.S. highway programs. That's the extension that the House forced on it. We were ready. We had a bill by March 31st. It continues. This latest continuing resolution provides funding through June 30, 2012. We're about to get to the end of that, and that's the extension the House is threatening to try to exceed. Quote, as construction season begins in the northern half of the country, this continuing uncertainty in funding could force states to delay projects rather than risk funding changes or political gridlock come July. That is exactly what we are seeing. As they said here, the political gridlock in Washington, D.C. and the doubts surrounding federal funding are making it difficult for issuers, bond issuers, capital issuers throughout the infrastructure sector to define long-term plans for funding necessary capital projects. If we get this turned around, then what happens? Well, according to Standard & Poor's, once a long-term authorization is approved, we believe it will provide an impetus for transportation agencies to reconsider high-priority projects that had been shelved because of lack of funding. So we can put people to work in this country. We can put people to work in this country on roads and bridges and highways, something that every American understands. We can do it under a bipartisan Senate bill that has the support of everybody from the business community to the labor community to the environmental community to perhaps obviously the highway construction community. But the House of Representatives, which couldn't pass a highway bill, which couldn't pass a highway bill, is jamming us in this endless conference. I don't know if it's their intention to knock out these jobs in this pre-election period. I don't know if they just can't get their house in order over there to do the basic legwork of passing a highway bill. But as we approach the end of this month, as we approach this second deadline, which it looks like they're going to miss again, I will urge my colleagues, let us hold their feet to the fire. There is no excuse for not passing the bipartisan Senate highway bill that is widely supported and that will create or defend nearly 3 million jobs in this country, 2.9 million to use the exact number that has been identified with this bill. So I think it's really important that we stick to our guns on this one. In Rhode Island, we have projects like Highway 95, where it comes through the city of Providence. It comes through as a bridge. It is a raised highway. If you go underneath that bridge to, say, drive into the back entrance of the Providence Place Mall, or to look where the highway goes over the Amtrak rails that connect the Northeast Corridor, what do you see? You see wooden planks that have been laid between the I-beams so that the highway falling in doesn't land on cars underneath, doesn't land on Amtrak trains or train tracks underneath. This is a project that needs to be rebuilt. It needs to be rebuilt now. It is connected to where State Routes 6 and 10 come in and connect to 95. You go under State Route 6 and State Route 10, as Senator Reid and I did recently with the mayor of Providence and with the transportation director, and you see that those highways are propped up by wooden supports. You see that pieces of the metal infrastructure have crumbled and fallen off onto the ground. This is highway work that needs doing. This is not bridges to nowhere. Every American driving across our bumpy roads knows we have work to do, and I call on my colleagues in the House to quit dawdling, to let this conference go. If they don't have an answer, if they can't pass a highway bill, if they can't do the basic legwork of governance to do something as simple as a highway bill, then get out of the way. At least get out of the way and let the bipartisan, widely supported Senate highway bill go. Thank you very much, Madam President. I yield the floor to my distinguished colleague and friend from Utah.
I thank my colleague, Madam President.
Senator from Utah.
Thank you, Madam President. The bad news does keep coming. Europe is in dire straits with the debt-riddled economies of Greece and now Spain.
threatening the future of the continent's economic union. There is real concern that this debt-fueled contagion in Europe will undermine our economy as well, and our economy cannot take too many more hits. The unemployment rate went back up to 8.2% last month. Only 69,000 new net payroll jobs were created. That is barely keeping up with population growth and is hardly the type of robust job growth that will be the foundation of a lasting and meaningful economic recovery. Now, we should have seen this coming. The minutes of the Federal Reserve's most recent monetary policy-making meeting makes numerous mention of uncertainties surrounding fiscal policy, and that those uncertainties are a risk to the economic outlook. Fed policymakers noted that, quote, they generally saw the U.S. fiscal situation also as a risk to the economic outlook. If agreement is not reached on a plan for the federal budget, a sharp fiscal tightening could occur at the start of 2013, unquote. That's the Fed policymakers. They concluded that, quote, uncertainty about the trajectory of future fiscal policy could lead businesses to defer hiring and investment. And, unquote, uncertainty about the fiscal environment could hold back both household spending on durable goods and business capital expenditures, unquote. Yesterday, the Congressional Budget Office reminded us yet again what the consequences will be to our economy if we fail to get our debt under control. According to one of their analyses, absent serious reform of entitlement spending programs, quote, federal debt would grow rapidly from its already high level, exceeding 90% of GDP in 2022. After that, debt as a share of GDP would exceed its historical peak of 109% by 2026, and it would approach 200% in 2037. And that's an optimistic view. The impact of this multiplying debt will be a gross national product that is reduced by 4.5% in 2027 and 13.5% in 2037. In other words, unless President Obama and his allies in the Senate get to work, Americans face a future of fewer jobs, flat or shrinking incomes, and loss of opportunity. And the sad truth is, as this chart shows, the President's allies have not gotten to work. We've had a hearing on tax extenders, but none on the AMT patch, the alternative minimum tax patch, none on the death tax reform, and we did have a hearing on prevent the 2013 tax hikes. But we've had no markup on any of those. We've had no floor consideration of any of those, and yet these are all extremely important. Well, it was no surprise, therefore, that when former President Clinton stated yesterday that we were still in a recession. Now, economists might say that is not technically accurate, but it is certainly how most Americans feel. What did come as a surprise, however, were President Clinton's remarks on Tax-Mageddon, the fiscal cliff that the nation faces at the end of this year. At least yesterday, it sounded like his view was that we should do a complete 180 and race away from this cliff, extending in full the tax relief enacted by President Bush and extended by President Obama in 2010. Several weeks ago, 41 Senate Republicans made a similar request of the Senate's Majority Leader, Senator Reid. This fiscal cliff is unquestionably contributing to our fiscal crisis and slowing the economy by creating enormous uncertainty for taxpayers and businesses. Absent action to extend this tax relief, Americans will be hit with a $310 billion tax increase next year alone. 26 million middle-income families will owe $92 billion in alternative minimum tax when filing their returns 1 year from now. A family of four earning $50,000 will get hit with a $2,183 tax hike. A small business owner will face a top marginal tax rate hike of 17%. That's catastrophic. The number of farmers who will face the death tax will rise by 2,200%. The number of small business owners who will face the death tax will rise by 900%. There should be no higher priority for the President and the Congress than addressing these tax increases. Yesterday, President Clinton seemed to agree, arguing that we should act now, not after the elections, to avoid the fiscal cliff. At a minimum, he concluded that a temporary extension of current tax relief was in order. Quote, to quote former President Clinton, "They will probably have to put everything off until early next year. That's probably the best thing to do right now," unquote. Now, I understand that the minority leader of the Senate and the Speaker of the House have now called for a one-year extension during which time we should do tax reform. That makes sense. And I'm committed as the ranking member on the Senate Finance Committee to do tax reform and hopefully bring both sides together for once in a long time to do what is in the best interest of this country. Now, President Clinton further argued, quote, "What I think we need to do is to find some way to avoid the fiscal cliff, to avoid doing anything that would contract the economy now, and then deal with what's necessary in the long-term debt reduction plan as soon as they can, which presumably will be after the election," unquote. Now, channeling Gilda Radner, and presumably following a dressing down by President Obama's campaign team, President Clinton tells us, never mind. But President Clinton knew what he was saying. One thing I can say, knowing him as well as I do, he's a very smart man. Now, he was making an elementary point, one that the President Obama seemed to agree with when he was not running for re-election on a platform that single-mindedly obsesses over raising taxes on families with incomes over $250,000. President Clinton, not wanting to further undermine our economy, recommended a short-term extension of all the tax relief. Now, that is precisely what President Obama agreed to at the end of 2010. And given our tepid economic growth and job creation and the threat from Europe, common sense would dictate a similar course today. Certainly if the alternative is a $300 billion tax increase, which it is. But today, President Obama is running for re-election, and tax relief for the so-called rich would undermine his message of wealth redistribution. Failure to extend this tax relief, though, is not an option. Just this morning, another Obama supporter and former director for the National Economic Council, Larry Summers, said, quote, Dr. Summers said, quote, "The real risk to this economy is on the side of slowdown. And that means we've got to make sure that we don't take gasoline out of the tank at the end of this year. That's got to be the top priority," unquote. The former director of President Obama's Office of Management and Budget concluded that what he estimates to be a $500 billion tax increase would be so large that, quote, "the economy could be thrown back into a recession," unquote. According to the magazine The Economist, the Congressional Budget Office has found that the combined effects of the sequester and the expiring tax relief would add up to a 3.6% of GDP in fiscal year 2013. In a $15 trillion economy, that would be a hit to GDP of $540 billion, which would surely tip us toward recession and even more job losses. So the question that the people of Utah and citizens around the country are asking themselves is, what's the holdup? If extending this tax relief is essential to providing families and businesses with the certainty and security necessary for economic growth, why are Senate Democrats refusing to take it up? And why is the President not pushing for immediate action to avoid this fiscal cliff? Let me suggest an answer. The President wants to drag this out until after this election. Even if that means months of additional pain for America's families and a real hit to our economy, it will serve his long-term goal, a goal that he dares not announce until after the election. President Obama does not want the precedent of extending this tax relief for everyone because ultimately his liberal base does not want it extended for anyone. The President and his advisors know that our debt is unsustainable. Their base will not allow for any serious changes to spending policy, and tax increases on the wealthy alone are not adequate, and they know this, are not adequate to get our fiscal house in order. The only solution, one that Hyde Park and Pennsylvania Avenue are loath to discuss openly, are tax increases on everybody. Now, this is Matt Bai writing last year in the New York Times. Quote, if Democrats are serious about reversing the policy of the Bush years, then they will probably have to be willing to make a case for eliminating all the tax cuts, not just those for the wealthiest Americans. And they may have to come up with some kind of more comprehensive plan for modernizing the entire tax code in order to persuade voters that even if some taxes go up, they might still come out ahead, unquote. Ezra Klein, the liberal blogger at the Washington Post, put it this way, quote, we cannot fund anything close to the government's commitments if we don't raise taxes or if we let only the Bush tax cuts for income over $250,000 expire, unquote. And though he is now persona non grata in President Obama's camp, just a few weeks ago, President Clinton was echoing this recommendation of tax increases for all. Quote, this is just me now. This is President Clinton. This is just me now. I'm not speaking for the White House. I think you could tax me at 100% and you wouldn't balance the budget. We are all going to have to contribute to this. And if middle-class people's wages were going up again and we had some growth to the economy, I don't think they would object to going back to tax rates from when I was president, unquote. Well, with due respect to our former president, I do think that he was speaking for the White House, and I do think that most Americans would object to a tax hike. That is why President Obama has decided to lay low rather than lead. The American people are not going to accept this. We live in a republic, and it is fundamentally illegitimate on an issue of this magnitude for a person running for President of the United States to put these decisions off until a lame duck session of Congress when he can no longer be held to account by the American people. It is not only an economic imperative that we extend this tax relief, it is demanded by our constitutional commitment to representative democracy. To borrow from Justice Scalia, quote, the American people love democracy and the American people are not fools, unquote. And if the President and his campaign team think that they can punt this issue into the fall, they are sorely mistaken. The American people will voice their displeasure with his failure to lead in November. President Clinton got it right the first time yesterday. The fiscal cliff must be addressed now. We cannot wait until later in the year. Our economy is struggling. American families are treading water. We have tried it their way for almost 4 years. We've tried an $850 billion stimulus. We have tried Obamacare, which was also supposed to be a jobs program. We have tried Dodd-Frank. It is time to try something else. There is no greater jobs program that Congress and the President could pursue than a permanent extension of the tax relief signed by Presidents Bush and Obama. It would provide enormous confidence to America's businesses and families at a time when confidence is sorely needed. This issue is not going away, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to pass tax relief for all Americans sometime this summer. Now, we all realize that we're in an election mode. Maybe I realize that more than most. But the fact of the matter is that we can't punt this anymore. We can't kick it down the road. We're going to have to find a means and a way whereby we extend this tax relief and then spend the next year working on tax reform and hopefully a bipartisan tax reform bill that everybody here can support. Now, I understand why the majority leader and other members of the Democratic Party are basically making sure that Democrats don't have a rough time in this election. by basically bringing up things like they did yesterday when we have 3 pieces of legislation already enacted that provide equal pay for equal work for women. All we have to do is get this administration to enforce those 3 bills. It was brought up for political reasons. We all know that here in this body, but I guess some people out there will buy off on that, even though it's clearly a sham. But so far this year, just about everything that the majority leader has brought up for and on behalf of the Democrats is to protect the sitting 23 Democrats who are up for re-election this year. Now, I don't blame the leader for wanting to protect his fellow Democrats. That's, after all, maybe part of the job of a leader. On the other hand, there are things that may be even more important, like the future welfare of our country, like jobs that are not being created right now. Not being created because we have no creators in the White House. It takes a president. It takes a president to lead on these issues. I would suggest to President Obama that he'd have a much better chance of re-election if he would lead out on some of these issues. And if he would go along with putting off these tax cuts and committing Democrats and Republicans to coming up with a bipartisan reform of this awful, despicable, unworkable tax code. You know, it might be one of the few ways that we can really bring people together. It might be one of the few ways that we can really turn this country around in the short term. I think the minority leader and the Speaker of the House have something here. We literally ought to do this and make it the main focal point of our existence as members of the United States Senate and members of the U.S. House of Representatives. If we do this, we might even find that we can get along again. We might even find that we can work together. We might even find that there's less politics, although there'll be plenty of that in any tax reform bill. But we might find it's fun again to be around here rather than both sides at each other's throats all the time. And we might even find that the president can lead for a change, which would be a pleasant change from what I've seen over the last number of years. I happen to like the president. I don't agree with him. Yes, I would like to replace him, but I like him personally. And I really believe if the president would lead here, and would make this a focal point, he'd have a better chance in this election. Not that I want him to be successful, but at least he'd have a better chance. Because the American people deep down feel that nothing is being done by the White House, by this body, and throughout the country. I kind of yearn for the day where Democrats and Republicans can really get along with each other again. When we really put the country first rather than re-election first. When we really look at each other and say, you know, I like him or her. I think I can work with them. It'd be a wonderful thing if we would do that. And this is a pretty fair suggestion. Keep the tax cuts alive until we reform this bloated, unworkable, stupid tax bill, or tax law. Code, I guess that would be the better way of putting it. I actually believe that it could be a way of making us all work together and making us all do so in the best interest of our country. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Well, I hope that my colleagues on both sides will go along with doing something that really makes sense like this. Because I believe that through these suggestions, we have the makings of something that could really not only help our country, but help all of us to be able to get along better and to work in the best interest of this country. But again, I'll just make a final point, and that is it takes presidential leadership to make major changes like this, and we don't have it right now. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Would the senator withhold?
I withhold.
Madam President, I thank
Senator from
my
Connecticut.
friend from Utah. I'm awaiting now. I do see with a great sense of reassurance the presence of the senator from Ohio. And while he's heading to his position, I would say this, Madam President. I have 6 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that they be printed in the record.
Without objection.
I thank the chair and I yield the floor.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to enter into a colloquy for 15 minutes with my colleague from Connecticut, Senator Lieberman, about new legislation we have just introduced, S-3078, the World War II Memorial Prayer Act of 2012.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. This bill, Madam President, will lead to the placement of a plaque or an inscription at the National World War II Memorial here in Washington, D.C., with a prayer that Franklin Roosevelt shared with the nation by radio address 68 years ago today. The occasion was D-Day, June 6, 1944. On that day, D-Day, American troops, joined by Allied forces, carried out an amphibious and airborne landing on 5 beaches along a 50-mile stretch of the heavily fortified coast of France's Normandy region. Some have termed those Normandy landings the beginning of the end of the war in Europe. And I think history records that that's probably true. And that's because courageous Americans and others were willing to risk it all, risk their lives on the coast of France that day. Thousands made the ultimate sacrifice that day. With the invasion underway, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt asked our nation to come together in prayer for the men who were engaged in this dangerous but very important battle. His powerful and ecumenical prayer, drawing on our nation's rich Judeo-Christian heritage and values, brought strength and inspiration to many during what was a very challenging time for our country. Today, I have the honor with Senator Lieberman, again, to introduce this legislation to commemorate that prayer and that day. His words, of course, also brought comfort later to the many grieving families and friends of the brave men who were killed in action. Those words of Franklin Roosevelt are etched in our history and in our minds, and we hope soon in stone. Our bill ensures that the prayer becomes a permanent reminder of the sacrifices of those who fought in World War II and of the power of prayer through difficult times. We've worked closely with the National Park Service to ensure that the plaque or inscription does not disrupt the World War II memorial or bypass what's called the Commemorative Works Act process, which governs monuments here in Washington, D.C. The placement and design of the plaque will be subject to a Commemorative Works approval and review process, which makes it consistent with legislation passed by previous Congresses. So it's adding some historical context to this beautiful memorial, adding a layer of commemoration, not taking anything away from the memorial that's already in place. Now, my friend in the House of Representatives, Congressman Bill Johnson of Ohio, introduced a House companion bill to this legislation. It actually has already passed the House earlier this year with an overwhelming bipartisan vote of 386 to 26. So today, on the 68th anniversary of this historic battle, known as D-Day, we hope to inspire the Senate to follow suit and tell the story of this powerful prayer that moved the nation and honored our heroes by placing a marker with the prayer at the World War II Memorial. I'd like now, Madam President, to turn things over to Senator Lieberman, my co-sponsor of this legislation and a leader in our Senate and in our country, for his thoughts. After that, we'll join together to recite parts of this incredibly powerful, extraordinary presidential prayer from World War II. Senator Lieberman.
Madam President, I thank my friend from Ohio. I thank him for taking the lead on what I'd call a noble project, and I'm confident that all of our colleagues will join us in this, to include FDR's national prayer at the World War II memorial. It's very important to remember in doing so that on D-Day, 68 years ago today, turned out to be a pivotal moment in the war in Europe. FDR chose not to give a speech announcing the landing at Normandy, but to offer a national prayer. And I think in doing so, he went to a very proud, not only tradition in America, but one of our great assets, that we've had the ability to bring faith and God in a very inclusive and non-discriminatory way into our public life, to the great benefit of our nation. As he delivered these words of prayer in a historic radio broadcast, which is, of course, the way it was done in those days, the success of the bold and dangerous D-Day plan was far from assured. But with the eloquent faithfulness of his words and with his steady presidential leadership, the brave American men and women in uniform landed at Normandy, I think strengthened by the conviction of our national values, the virtue and righteousness of their cause, and of course with confidence that they would benefit from the guiding grace of God. And it is, I remember on another Normandy, moving words by President Reagan on another Normandy anniversary, when he said, the men of Normandy had faith that what they were doing was right, faith that they fought for all humanity, faith that a just God would grant them mercy on this beachhead or on the next. Indeed, I think adding FDR's prayer to the grandness of the World War II memorial will even elevate it, and will rightly remind all who visit it of the central and essential role that faith in God played at that pivotal moment of world history, and also remind us that faith in God has played a pivotal role in American history every day since the Declaration of Independence, July 4, 1776, when our founders declared that they were forming our new government to secure the rights to life, liberty, and happiness that each of us received as an endowment from our Creator. All this is expressed in the wonderful idea that Senator Portman has had and would be accomplished by this project. So I yield back to my friend from Ohio for the beginning of Roosevelt's prayer.
I thank my colleague from Connecticut, and so well said. The power of prayer in this case, as was true in our nation's great history, was a comfort and inspiration to the country. As I noted earlier, we would like to recite the prayer, and so I would ask those in the gallery and on the floor here to join us in this prayer. I will start by reading the first half, including some words that President Roosevelt said prior to the prayer, and then I'm asking Senator Lieberman if he will read the second half. So Franklin Roosevelt started off by saying, "My fellow Americans, last night when I spoke to you about the fall of Rome, I knew at that moment the troops of the United States and our allies were crossing the Channel in another and greater operation. It has come to pass with success thus far. And so in this poignant hour, I ask you to join me in prayer." And he said, "Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day is set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness in their faith. We will need thy blessings. The road will be long and hard, for the enemy is strong. He may hurl back our forces. Success may not come with rushing speed, but we shall return again and again. And we know that by thy grace and by the righteousness of our cause, our sons will triumph. They will be sore tired and tried by night and by day, without rest, until the victory is won. The darkness will be rent by noise and flame. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of war. For these men are lately drawn from the ways of peace. They fight not for the lust of conquest. They fight to end conquest. They fight to liberate. They fight to let justice arise and tolerance and goodwill among all thy people. They yearn but for the end of battle, for their return to the haven of home. Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom. Senator Liebman, I'd now like for you to read the second half of the prayer, if you would.
Thank you, Senator Portman. And I continue with Roosevelt's prayer. And for us at home, fathers, mothers, children, wives, sisters, and brothers of brave men overseas, whose thoughts and prayers are ever with them, help us, Almighty God, to rededicate ourselves in renewed faith in Thee in this hour of great sacrifice. Many people have urged, Roosevelt said, that I call the nation into a single day of special prayer. But because the road is long and the desire is great, I ask that our people devote themselves in a continuance of prayer as we rise to each new day. And again, when each new day is spent, let words of prayer be on our lips, invoking thy help to our efforts. Give us strength, too, strength in our daily tasks, to redouble the contributions we make in the physical and the material support of our armed forces. And let our hearts be stout, to wait out the long travail, to bear sorrows that may come, to impart our courage unto our sons wheresoever they may be. And, O Lord, give us faith. Give us faith in Thee, faith in our sons, faith in each other, faith in our united crusade. Let not the keenness of our spirit ever be dulled. Let not the impacts of temporary events, of temporal matters of but fleeting moment, let not these deter us in our unconquerable purpose. With thy blessing, we shall prevail over the unholy forces of our enemy. Help us to conquer the apostles of greed and racial arrogances. Lead us to the saving of our country, and with our sister nations into a world of unity that will spell a sure peace. A peace invulnerable to the schemings of unworthy men, and a peace that will let all men live in freedom, reaping the just rewards of their honest toil. Thy will be done, Almighty God. Amen. Madam President, as we know, many lives were lost on D-Day and what followed, but it led to the defeat, if I may use President Roosevelt's words, of the unholy forces of our enemy, and of a remarkable period of peace and prosperity in America and certainly in Europe. These are words, if I might add briefly, though the circumstances of challenge that we face at this moment in our nation's history are much less grave than America faced on June 6, 1944. Nonetheless, there's a certain absence of hopefulness today and confidence, and I would suggest respectfully that one of the great sources of hopefulness and confidence that we all could benefit from today is exactly the faith in God, in a very inclusive way that President Roosevelt spoke on that fateful day of June 6, 1944. Again, with thanks to my friend from Ohio for this idea and for his generosity of spirit in inviting me to join him both in sponsoring this proposal and in reading this prayer today, I yield the floor back to the senator from Ohio.
I thank my friend from Connecticut, and I tell him I'm proud to stand by his side in this small effort to commemorate what happened 68 years ago today, which was the President calling the nation in prayer and invoking the Almighty to help protect our sons and daughters in battle. I got back from Afghanistan yesterday morning, and I would agree with my friend from Connecticut that so much of what we are facing today would also be relevant to these words. I think particularly of the words where it says in the prayer, "For these men are lately drawn from the ways of peace. They fight not for the lust of conquest. They fight to end conquest. They fight to liberate. They fight to let justice arise and tolerance and goodwill among all thy people. They yearn but for the end of battle, for their return to the haven of home." That certainly describes our brave young men and women in uniform who are today in Afghanistan protecting us and encouraging tolerance, goodwill, justice, not just for us, but for that country and indeed for the world. I thank my colleague again for his being willing to join me in this effort. I hope that my other colleagues will join us in encouraging this important and extraordinary prayer and this example of the power of faith in our nation's history to be added to the World War II Memorial. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor. Madam President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Just to let you know about a live event that we're covering tomorrow, Federal Reserve Board Chairman Ben Bernanke is testifying on Capitol Hill about the economic outlook before the Joint Economic Committee. The chairman will also likely respond to the May job numbers released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics last Friday and the Fed's consumer credit figures, which will be released tomorrow. You can watch that live coverage of the hearing tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern over on C-SPAN 3. During this quorum call on the Senate floor, just a quick update on news from overseas. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta is in India today and is strongly defending U.S. use of drones to kill insurgents in Pakistan. He said that America has made it clear to Islamabad that it will continue to target al-Qaeda leaders in that country. And when he was asked whether the drone strikes created a problem with Pakistani sovereignty, Secretary Panetta said that, quote, "This is about our sovereignty as well." He said that the strikes are not just about protecting the U.S., but are protecting Pakistan as well, since people in that country are also targets of the insurgents.
Mr. President, I would ask that we suspend the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, today we have before us the Agricultural Reform, Food,